The issues affecting you. Revealed, explained, discussed. Now on WGAL 8 in Focus.
Hello, I'm Susan Shapiro. The Susquehanna Valley is rich in history. For instance, Columbia, Lancaster County played a vital role in the Underground Railroad. It was a network of secret routes and safe houses that enslaved African Americans used to escape to free states. Tonight, we're going to learn about this well-kept secret and how a group is working to preserve the history with a museum. Tonight, we're putting the Underground Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in focus. Joining me now is Mark Stewart, a member of the Underground Railroad Center of Columbia's organizing group. Thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be here, Susan.
You're somewhat of a newcomer. What brought you and your wife to Columbia?
Well, about 3 years ago, we were searching for our final house, I would say, having lived in various places that were very much like Columbia. They had all this potential, and then at some point they just sort of popped and became very hip and very successful. And we saw all of those same qualities in Columbia, and we purchased a house that had been built in 1795 by William Wright, who was the person who's been credited with starting the idea of the Underground Railroad in this part of the country.
Wow, so you're really almost living the history there.
We are, yeah, and
wow.
It's been fascinating. And of course, it didn't take long for me to find out some of the more interesting details about what he did and what the town was involved with, which was basically a conspiracy of good to move freedom seekers who made it across the Susquehanna River towards freedom.
Columbia was really an important point of entry for people coming from Maryland, Virginia, and other places south. Why was that?
Well, if you had successfully escaped from a plantation or from your owner, you had to get across the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania, but that was really, you know, for all intents and purposes, just a dotted line. If there was someone chasing you, and usually there was, that really didn't stop them. You had to put a large, imposing geographical barrier between you and the people who were pursuing you, and the Susquehanna River is over a mile wide, I believe, in Columbia, and in addition, it had an enormous covered bridge that went across, which was controlled by the Quakers who controlled Columbia, as well as some of the white and African American business owners in that town. So it was a natural landing spot for people who were, you know, trying to escape.
And many of the people ended up staying in Columbia.
Yes, the system that was devised there was meant to move people to Lancaster, to Philadelphia, and then on towards Canada, where they would be free. But a lot of people, once they arrived there, they sort of were able to kind of exhale and say, I made it. And they felt very safe. There was always a significant African American community in Columbia on a percentage basis, much higher than other towns like it. And there were very influential African American business leaders, Stephen Smith, William Whipper, who employed them. There were black property owners and black business owners, and for some people it felt like a natural place to stay.
Which was certainly, you know, the business owners was unusual at that time. But
yeah, you know, as you dig into the details, it wasn't a perfect situation, but it was really unusual in terms of this part of the country and that time in our history.
So just briefly, if you could, how did the Underground Railroad work in that area? How did it go on?
Well, in Columbia, it was very much an open secret. It was sort of the best kept, worst kept secret. In the home that we purchased, the Wright family was influential enough so that if a freedom seeker made it across the Susquehanna River and came into that particular home, and more than 1,000 did, they wouldn't be hiding in a wall or in a basement or something like that. They'd be sitting in the living room. So it's a very powerful feeling for us to sit in the living room and realize all the things that must have happened there. We don't believe in ghosts, but you know, if we did, it would be very, you know, it would be very chilling to think about all the things that transpired in that living room. But William Wright is credited with figuring out to move people from place to place, usually Quaker homes, and get them to Philadelphia. Some of this later on was done with actual overground railroads. Smith and Whipper operated a railroad from Columbia to Philadelphia, and they built special cars where they could hide people and move them there. So, and some people went by canal up to Harrisburg. There was a very strong abolitionist movement in Harrisburg as well.
But it was clearly very well organized.
It was, and how they communicated is a point of interest for us and for the museum. We're going to try and figure that out a little bit better. People didn't write things down. There's not a lot of artifacts. There's not a lot of records on this.
Since they were trying to keep it a secret.
They were keeping
right?
it a secret. If you and I were doing something like this, we would not be sending emails or texts, as we have learned now through the news. It's not a good idea. So at best, maybe they left little cryptic messages in the classifieds of the Columbia Spy and other newspapers.
Interesting. Wow. Really fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your insight. Coming up on WGAL 8 in Focus, we'll talk about the museum and its potential on the economic impact.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus. Coverage you can count on.
We continue our conversation with Mark Stewart, and joining us now is another member of the group, Daisy Pagan. Daisy, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, you're a longtime business owner in
Yes.
Columbia. What drew you there, and what have you found?
We actually went to Columbia when we found a property to build our reception venue.
You have an event space there.
Yes, 20 years now.
Oh, that's great. But you're also the manager of the gift shop at Hinkle's. And
Yes.
of course, a lot of people know Hinkle's as a longtime drugstore and a gift shop and a
Yes.
lunch counter.
Yes, and it's been very successful now.
Yeah. What have you found in the building that you did purchase in terms of its connection to the Underground Railroad?
So I was not aware of any of the history until we got there, and there's a catacomb in the basement that is believed to have gone under the road and over towards Mark Stewart's house.
Yeah, so they went between these two buildings?
Yep.
And maybe three.
Yeah, a lot of the downtown buildings at one time or another were probably involved in the Underground Railroad. It was not a short-term project. It lasted for at least 50 years, so it was a generational conspiracy, if you will.
So why this many years later develop a museum like this?
It's always been a desire of most townspeople to have an Underground Railroad museum. There's lots of tours and that kind of thing. People typically come to Columbia for the history. And so we've been thinking about it for quite a while, and 8 people came together like-minded and decided that we were going to make it happen.
So you think this is an important story to tell?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not just a story about the people of Columbia. It's really about the people of Pennsylvania, and we're calling the museum the Underground Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. So we'll be telling that whole story, but we'll be focusing on the people of Columbia and how they work together in sort of an Ocean's 11 kind of way to make this happen over a very long period of time. I think people will find it very exciting when they go there.
So how do you tell that story? You said to me earlier there aren't a lot of artifacts from the time period. A lot of it was kept secret. So how do you go about telling that story?
Again, we want to focus on the people who work together to make this happen. And from the museum experience I have and from the museum designers I've worked with in the past, I know that right now, and certainly as we get closer to opening, there's technology available that has real wow factor appeal. Things like full-size holograms, artificial intelligence. Our vision is that someone will come to this museum and be able to interact with a Stephen Smith or a William Whipper or a Robert Loney or a William Wright, and not only see them, face to face, but interview them as you were interviewing us. So there's a lot of exciting stuff out there, and again, this is something when we talk to the architects and the designers who are in this business, that excites them too. They are really, really psyched to see what we come up with here. And part of it is a function of not having a ton of artifacts that can enable you to interpret what it was to escape from slavery, if you think about it.
Who do you hope to attract?
We're casting a very wide net because it's the Underground Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. We would be targeting the markets in New Jersey, New York, and then Baltimore, Washington, that kind of thing.
And I imagine, given your experience, you will have a gift shop there.
Absolutely. First and foremost, really.
What will that include, do you think?
A lot of regional novelty. Again, the museum is focusing on the 13 or so people that kept this conspiracy for 50 plus years, and no one ever got caught. So it'll be fun to get some merchandising around that.
Yeah, to help tell the story.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. It's amazing when you said that went on for 50 years and no one ever got caught.
Mm-hmm.
It was an open secret. I mean, certainly the people the freedom seekers who came there understood that they had to get there. So it was, it was something that was known. But again, that enormous barrier of the Susquehanna River and the town being controlled by Quakers and African American business people who were all working in concert, it made it very difficult to come get someone, and certainly to come and arrest somebody.
Well, thank you both for being here.
Absolutely.
And Daisy, you're going to stay with us and we'll talk
Yes.
more about some of your personal history
Yes.
related to this.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus, coverage you can count on.
We continue our conversation with Daisy Pagan, and joining us now is another group member, Kimberly Fletcher. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What got you involved?
Well, I'm good friends with Daisy, and Daisy contacted me about 2 years ago and asked me to be part of this group as they were working toward building an Underground Railroad Museum. So, of course, I'm going to say yes to my good friend, and admittedly, I did not know much about the history, so I had to become a quick study and get involved.
Well, that's what Daisy said. You really didn't know a lot about this. It could be because there's not a lot out there, right?
Exactly. We need us.
So how do you tell this very sobering, sad story and get people to come and be interested in it?
It is sobering and it is sad. And I think that that's why the focus of this museum will be the conspiracy of good and focusing on the 13 people that kept this enormous secret for 2 generations, almost 50 years, a secret, and no one ever got found out. Nobody ever got caught, and the stakes were really high at that time.
Yeah, it's amazing to think no one got caught.
Yes.
Exactly.
What have you found in terms of your own personal stories about any connection to this period of time, or what kind of research have you done and found out?
Well, my father was very much interested in learning our history. And unfortunately, he's no longer here, so I've tried to pick that up for our family, and I have had some success on both sides. So I've been excited about that, but I've run into some challenges because some people may not know Africans were property, and in slave schedules, which are the historical documents, there might be names for the slaves, but many of them were not given names. So it might say boy, 13 years old, girl, 2 years of age. So I've run into some of those challenges to be able to refer back to my history, but so far.
Which it makes this museum a challenge in that respect.
It does, but
Yeah.
also exciting so that people can learn about the conspiracy of good in Columbia and that there were good people out there to help shepherd escaped slaves to freedom.
And I know, Daisy, you found out some interesting history in your family.
Yes, so my mother's great-grandmother, 4 generations up, was born a slave. And so my own great-grandmother lived well into her hundreds and would talk about the experiences of her great-grandmother.
And when you hear that, what does that do to you?
Again, very sobering, and it's a reminder of how our ancestors didn't have the same opportunities that we did, that we have now.
And in terms of the opening and the physical building, when is this all going to happen?
So it'll be the tricentennial of Columbia in 26. That's our target date. And it's at 331 Locust Street. which was an old Mason's building and an old Woolworths building. A bit of irony
There is an irony in case people don't remember, but Woolworths in, I think, North Carolina?
Greensboro.
Yeah, was one of the first to integrate the
lunch
counter, right? So very appropriate, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
What do you hope for in terms of who this draws and what people get out of it?
I hope it draws anyone who's interested in learning about our history.
It's become a little sensitive, I think.
Yes.
Some people debating on how the history should be told,
or if it should be told.
If it should be told,
And so we really are hoping to inspire people to learn about the history, to learn where we came from, to know where we're going, and how we are doing better, and hopefully striving to do better. And having graduated from a Quaker high school in New Jersey, it's exciting to me to see that connection with the Quaker faith and William Wright having been a Quaker. I'm not Quaker, but I do know about the religion and their humanitarian efforts. So I'm really excited about that. And I want people to learn that history. There's so many pieces to this puzzle that we are still trying to put together. And I think people will be excited about an interactive experience with this museum and getting to know more about Columbia and its dynamic work.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you both for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And coming up on WGAL 8 in Focus, we'll talk with an architect who worked on the National Museum of African American History and Culture and how she's helping with this project.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus. Coverage you can count on.
Joining us from North Carolina is Zena Howard. She's an architect who's worked on several high-profile projects, including the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington and the International Civil and Human Rights Museum in North Carolina. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
How did you get involved in this project?
Oh, this was, I became involved several years ago, around 2018, 2019. It was definitely before COVID when I was invited by, at that time, members that have been working on this initiative for quite some time. They're now current members of the board to visit and just kind of explore this notion of a museum celebrating the story.
You've been described as a citizen architect and you recognized for shaping architecture through Remembrance Design. What does that mean?
So, Remembrance Design is essentially culling for untold stories, lost memories, lost histories, and oftentimes those are embedded in individuals that are, still with us or stories that they are aware of that have passed down from generations. And it's really just taking that time up front to mine for those stories and to understand how those stories can inform design in a very meaningful way. But also it's about using the past to build a more sustainable future. Once those stakeholders and individuals, we call them partners in design, are bought into the design, they become owners and partners with us. And of course, long after the designers are gone, they sustain that history and those memories as the project pushes forward.
In this case, you won't be designing a new building. You'll be using an existing building that also has a lot of history. How is that different?
Yes, that is different. And actually, oftentimes, existing buildings come with their own, constraints and limitations. And oftentimes that fuels the most creativity. And so this is about putting in, an immersive experience full of digital technology to tell the story, but also, traditional analog ways of telling a story, using the volume that we have within the space, sometimes opening up volume where we need to. And we've certainly done that before. And we actually think it should be very well respected that an existing building is being used in light of just rehabbing and using our resources in a wonderful way, particularly since this building has such a rich history in Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely. We've discussed with our other guests, this is a sad story to tell. How do you make this an inviting place for visitors?
Well, oftentimes in my line of work, a lot of the stories are sad, are very sad, but each and every one of them have these very heroic, very wonderful understories that go along with it. So whenever you're telling a story about civil rights or human rights or civil war or all of the things that our country has been through, there's oftentimes very wonderful success stories. And so we take visitors through that. And it's really, really important sometimes to give them a moment to sort of decompress and understand. So there's moments of respite that are designed throughout the building or throughout the experience to allow visitors to have that place where they can just sort of come to grips with what they've learned.
And I know you mentioned to me earlier, this is not something you knew about. It seems like a lot of people, even in Columbia, really didn't know the history of this subject.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it was so fascinating to me to be a part of this. It's just, again, you talked about remembrance design connecting to untold stories or memories or uncovered truths. And that was what this was for me when I was approached and heard about this. And I thought, good Lord, I had not heard anything about this story. So working with this fantastic group of folks for the last 3 to 5 years has been amazing.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for WGAL 8 in Focus. For all of us at WGAL, I'm Susan Shapiro, and join us again next Saturday night at 7 o'clock for WGAL 8 in Focus, right after NBC Nightly News. And you can watch each episode of In Focus, plus WGAL's latest newscasts, original programming, and more. Just download the Very Local app and stream for free on Roku and Amazon Fire TV.